Hey everyone, thanks for joining me on the Slice of Finance podcast. Scott, great to have you here today.
Hey, Jared, thanks so much for having me.
Scott is what I tell people my name is when I go to a coffee shop so they don't mess it up.
Scott is what I tell people my name is not at a coffee shop. Funny enough, if you say the name Scott at a coffee shop, at least with my speech impediment, people oftentimes can't hear it and think my name is Sky.
When I say Jared, they write Jerry on it. So it's yeah. Anyway, Sky. Okay, you and I just gave great trivia about us in the future.
Hopefully, we don't reveal any more of our security questions.
That is it. Yeah, that is. You're right. We'll go. We have to go change that after. Scott, great to have you here today. Let's start out by having you tell the audience a little bit about yourself and then an overview of Fizz.
Happy to share a bit about myself and my company called Fizz. I grew up in Detroit, Michigan. I was the son of two entrepreneurs, so I grew up seeing my parents build businesses. They weren't tech businesses by any means, but I always knew I would do my own thing. I then also went to college as a kid during the pandemic. I did really about a year and a half of school before the pandemic hit. Ended up meeting my co-founder there, and we went on to start a company called Fizz. Fizz makes financial tools for college students, including a debit card that builds credit, a budgeting app, and a Duolingo like toolkit for financial literacy. So yeah, that's a bit about me, and I've been at it for about 4 years now.
I love it. Love the hat too, by the way.
Thank you. We have a bunch of merch because we do a bunch of campus launches. I've been to pretty much every college campus, at least top 100 in the United States. So I have to show up looking sharp.
And the college campuses love the swag, right? For sure. Actually, that's a good question to ask you. What's been, not to necessarily name favorites, but what's been kind of one of the most like cool, welcoming campuses you've been to lately?
Yeah, so I've spent a ton of time at the University of Texas, Austin. I think Austin's a very cool town for a number of reasons, but the students there are just incredibly intense. I've met students from pretty much every school you could name, but at UT Austin, I think specifically the kids in Macomb School of Business, as well as the engineering undergrads, there's extreme talent density down there. So I would like to spend even more time in Texas. We actually, it's one of the schools we haven't hired from yet, interestingly, but I will be spending much more time there.
Yet, right? It's still possible. What I would love for us to focus on today is, there's a lot people say about, Gen Z and younger generations. One of the things is, I don't want to call it a stereotype, but like, and probably a lot of people in Gen Z would agree with this, but there's a lack of financial literacy. First off, talk me through why you believe that is, or why you know that is the case, and then how you're helping with that.
Yeah, people do say a lot of things about Gen Z. It's one of it's a generation that people like to talk a bit about. I think I sort of wonder sometimes if this was the case for every generation when they were the one that was in the next seat up, but now we're maybe just aware of it, more aware of it because of social media and everything like that. But the conception around financial literacy is obviously one I care a ton about. Gen Z is actually as financially illiterate as people like to say they are. And there's a couple of interesting reasons for that. I think first, maybe it's the paradox of it. You'd expect that in an information age where a Gen Z can find any amount of financial information that they might desire on YouTube or TikTok, or now they may ask ChatGPT or Claude, that it wouldn't be the case. It's sort of a systemic issue though. So if you think about it, this has never been something that we required kids to learn in school, whether that was high school, middle school, elementary, or even college. It was never a part of the curriculum. So that meant in order to be a student who had any level of financial literacy, you had to learn it from your parents. But if your parents sort of grew up in the same sort of school system that you did and they didn't come from a privileged background, that meant that you're entering adulthood having no financial literacy as well. So part of what we like to do at the company is use financial literacy to make Gen Z more comfortable with their finances so that they don't repeat that cycle.
We'll stay on Gen Z, even if this is the case for other generations. And if you say this is something for other generations, let's just put them into the bucket as well. What some of the biggest financial mistakes that people end up making at a young age, though? Let's just say, let's not make Gen Z, but at a young age.
Some of the bigger financial mistakes that people tend to make at a young age, and we have a lot of data to support this, is that they do not start building credit early on enough. So when you think in building credit like your GPA for the real world, but if you talk to a kid on at a high school, let alone or even a college campus, most of them couldn't actually tell you what the maximum credit score is, or what's a good credit score, or even what's a bad one. They oftentimes don't even know whether or not they have one. So credit's a big bucket there. Another bucket that we're all super familiar with is student loans. People go to college, they sign these promissory notes. They don't really know what they're signing themselves up for. Then they graduate, and then they have a monthly debt payment that might take up as much as half of their income, and then they have to get on something like an income-based repayment plan. So then you're ending up in a situation where you never really have agency over your own personal finances because you made these early mistakes, and it's something that a lot of students and young people in general just end up getting punished for.
And if you have to put lots of money towards repaying a loan versus investing in like your 401k or an IRA or something, right? That adds up substantially over time when you think of the how that compounds. So making that mistake early on, it can cost many people, right, over the course of their lifetime, hundreds of thousands of dollars potentially, no matter what their level of income is. So yeah, really interesting. One of the things, Scott, I ask every guest when they come on is there's lots of things that lead to starting, your business, but what was the aha, like, last straw type moment that made you actually decide to do it? Because there's a lot that goes in, like, oh, the idea, and a lot of people will think the idea is the moment they decided to do it, but there's always that last domino when you decide to do it. What was that last domino?
So we had a lot of ideas. Actually, we maybe had 100 of them when we were considering starting a company. And for my partners, my co-founder and myself, what was really the last straw was we were at Cornell, where I was studying, and Harvard, where my co-founder was studying, and we saw that all of our smartest friends could. They were really encyclopedias when it came to their domain-specific knowledge in their majors that many of them had even not yet declared. But when you ask them questions about their personal finances, regardless of whether they were from a wealthy family or your average middle-class American family, they really couldn't tell you anything. And that included the difference between a credit and a debit card. And we thought that was pretty damning. The economy really, in aggregate, from a macro perspective, is better than ever. Gen Z actually right now will be graduating into one of the best economies that the world has really ever known. But if you talk to them, they don't really feel like that. There's sort of a recession of vibes, or there's this neologism called the vibe session. And this means that there's sort of something missing when it comes to their actual understanding of their finances and the actual economic opportunity that lays ahead. And what we're really interested in is closing that gap by giving students agency over their personal finances. So when confronted with the data that financial literacy had cratered to 3-decade lows and the fact that our smartest friends really knew nothing, we knew that we had to build something.
Now, how do you continue to know what to build? Like, how important is the feedback that you get from, this young generation in what you're building? And then how do you decide what gets added to roadmap versus what maybe gets shelved for a later date?
I love this stuff. For us, it's all about user research. So when we started the company, we left school to build Fizz. So the people we were doing user research on were literally our ex roommates or the classmates from the class that we had been in 2 weeks prior. So it was very easy in the beginning. Over time, it's been incredibly important to build up a user research practice. So we make product decisions very much with users in hand. We have a person who's full time on our team. He's incredibly talented. And what he does is broker these conversations between every member of the Fizz team who will take time out of their calendar to speak with Fizz users. And then not only Fizz users, so our offices in New York City will oftentimes go to Washington Square Park and pull an NYU student into the office, buy them a coffee if they let us interview them. So that's something that we're really proud of, but it's also been at its core the real lifeblood of the business.
Now, you've been doing this for a few years. What continues to drive you in building this business?
What continues to drive me in building Fizz is really, and this might sound trite, but the ability to make like a very demonstrable impact on the financial lives of students. It's every single day where we receive a message where someone says, because I started using Fizz last year, I can now get an off-campus apartment. And I didn't have to ask my parent who I'm estranged from to co-sign a loan. And these are incredibly powerful things. And of course, it's a bit self-interested because we're building a business on the back of it. But the fact that this market has been untouched and the fact that legacy players have really abandoned it is something that compels us just to do better by young adults. We think there's a very big business to be built. And for us, it's also, it's about a rare double bottom line. And it's something that keeps me excited every day, 4 years in, and something that I'd be excited to continue doing for the rest of my life.
Question for you, like, when you look at, because there's been companies that have, like you said, they either stopped doing it or they decided not to go into this space. I believe what you're doing is super important, and I'm just gonna kind of go from the other end, though, is why do you think, why does this opportunity, why is it still available for you to continue building and do something, whereas some companies left or decided not to pursue? Now, I know some of these companies are just massive, and in some cases, when you get to a certain size, right, you have to pick certain areas you wanna go into and leave others for the startups that are gonna go and build and really be interested in building it, but would love your take on why do you think that is?
I think the reason why a lot of companies haven't touched this space, there are two answers that I'd have to that question. One is that a lot of people on the startup side really have tried. This was an incredibly difficult company to build from a software and regulatory point of view. There wasn't a lot of off-the-shelf stuff that we could use and plug into to make Fizz a reality. It took me and my team about 2.5 years and millions of dollars to be able to launch Fizz. Of course, in the VC-backed startup sphere, the millions of dollars part isn't hard to come by, but maybe the dedication to be able to endure multiple systemic partnership failures in an extremely heightened era of regulatory scrutiny, maybe that was a bit rarer. And then on the traditional player side, it's also comes down a bit to regulation. So everyone has a story maybe of when they were in college before around 2006 or 2008, and they got a slice of pizza in exchange for filling out a credit card application. And then surprise, next day you had a credit card. You then probably used that card for a couple of years, paid more interest than you'd like to remember, and then graduated with a credit score that was like just okay, but really not great. This is something that Congress really clamped down on with the introduction of the Card Act, which made these bigger banks really stay the hell away from college campuses, and they've stayed away since. So part of what we've built at Fizz is a product that is much more amenable to, one, the regulatory environment, but also two, objectively has the potential to cause far less harm to a student who uses it in school.
When people go to your website, they're gonna see, like, all these great testimonials, and you definitely have, a bunch of people that love what you've built. What I wanted to kind of hear from you is, if you had to, you obviously have a bunch of advice on these matters, but if you had to take 3 things, if you're for students, for financial advice and give it to them, what would those 3 things be?
Jared, you ask a really great question, and now that I've spent a bunch of time on campuses, I've actually have been asked by students this, so I'd essentially love to be able to have monitored myself and seeing what answers I gave them at the time. I guess the first is students are extraordinarily consumed right now with sort of what what they might be able to achieve in a very short amount of time. They sort of think that their economic destiny will manifest the second that they step off of campus. And they think that their first job is the one that should be paying them an incredible amount of money to support their lifestyle goals. And part of it is, the answer is not necessarily patience so much as that your economic reality will manifest if you simply take a very concrete series of actions. So if you are a student, you feel that you are lacking agency over your potential finances, such that you think that there might have to be some great strike of luck for you to be able to ever buy a house one day. Maybe first you should start by understanding exactly what your student loan payment will be when you graduate. Second, maybe you should think about building credit. Third, you should actually adhere to a budget. And four, there's a lot of on-campus jobs that are actually available. So it doesn't all have to be about mom and dad. So this sounds like some advice that maybe a boomer might typically give to a Gen Z, but I think when it's coming from me, or when it's coming from like the advice that my product provides, I think it tends to land a bit more. So one is just take an inventory of the concrete actions that you can do right now that will have a very demonstrable and obvious impact on your financial future. Two, I think what happened with COVID was sort of that the pipeline from doing an internship in college to getting a full-time job was a bit broken, and I don't think we've yet rebuilt it. So I think students have to be radically more intentional about getting an internship, networking, and then building their own pathway to a career rather than waiting for employers to find them. That's something that we see a lot. We've done a ton of internships at the company. Some of our best talent came from our internship programs, but you oftentimes end up like hiring the self-starters instead of the people who are waiting for you to recruit them at a campus job fair. So being incredibly high agency about your career is just as important about being high agency about your finances. So those are maybe the two pieces of advice I'd give to college students.
I'll add some from my point of view too, Scott. I wrote a book a couple years ago called "It's Your Future, Plan for It," on how to pay off your loans super early, get the job that you want, get the internships that you want. And it's based on my experience. And one of the things I want to tell students today that I'm not seeing very often, there's platforms out there, right, to get There's the handshakes, and there's still you can go to Indeed and all these job websites. But I like the entrepreneur in me when I want to find also certain people that I see have an interest, and I'm seeing very few of these students on LinkedIn or active on LinkedIn at all. They don't have to be super active, but I'll send sometimes a message where there'll be a student on that says they have X background or X interest in something. And I'm like, oh, this could be someone that's cool that I want to talk to go and see. Maybe there's an internship. I'm not advertising for it, but based on what they've already put on their profile, I haven't, and then I won't hear back from them at all. They don't even read the message. Um, I don't think LinkedIn is that big of a priority, right, for a lot of these students. I would just say to them, it's not something you have to go on every day when you're still in school, but maybe check it every now and then because there could be some cool opportunities. And then the second piece on my end, I always say that students have a certain age, but they can pretty much ask the top leaders, like all these founders from companies, they can pretty much reach out, and that founder is not going to expect that they just are reaching out to want something, to learn. And very few of them take it. And there's kind of that age of once you reach a certain age, everyone, no matter if it's genuine or not, people expect when you're asking them, like reaching out to them, that you want something. And students are probably one of the few groups that can go without needing anything at all, and a lot of people will still talk to them.
It's very interesting you mentioned that, and I agree wholeheartedly with what you said, especially around it. It's your future, plan for it. When we were starting Fizz, actually the only reason we were able to get into some of the rooms is because we were so young, one, and two, because we were doing things. We literally did it under the guise of doing it for a student project. So we would reach out to someone who we needed to talk to, who knew a lot about banking regulations, to keep it simple, and we would say we're doing a student project at Harvard, and we would love if you would be come on and talk to us for a few minutes. Of course, then when we got on the call, we sort of disabused them of that illusion. But using the fact that you're a student as a way into the door can be an incredibly powerful thing. And as you said, it's time limited.
Yeah, I mean, you could reach out to some of the top CEOs, not that they'll all answer, right? And that's what every generation needs to realize this, especially the young generation. It's okay if people don't answer. You like rejection is just going to be something that you'll continuously face. It doesn't mean they're not interested in you either. It just, yeah, I don't know about you, Scott, but I used to always say when people didn't answer my emails, I'm like, what the heck? And now when I don't do that sometimes, I'm like, it's not because I'm not interested. Just you have to kind of pick and choose sometimes. But anyway, yeah, good advice. Any parting thoughts before we wrap up here, Scott, to anyone that's listening?
I'd say that it's all about being an active participant in your own destiny, and that most of the time, all you have to do in really any context is just ask. And I think people just want to know that other people care, one about them, but also just about themselves. And I think that the incalculable effect that one can have on one's own destiny just by taking that first step and no longer being passive is incredible and will pay amazing dividends.
The magic words, just ask. Very few people do that though, right?
Very few.
Steve Jobs used to say that all the time. He goes, it'd be funny how you could just call someone up and ask. And what's the worst they say? No? Be
Tell
polite.
someone the worst they can say is no. And if someone had told me 5 years ago that I would build a financial technology company from scratch, I would have said hell no, and then I would have said, how would you expect me to do that? And I would not have expected that the answer would be to just ask and then get started.
Yeah, it's what's that? You know Les Brown?
Wes Brown, I'm unfortunately unfamiliar.
No, Les Brown. So he a motivational speaker, but he had this thing, basically this quote he used to say, basically, you don't have to be great to get started, but you have to get started to be great. And that always stood with me. Anyway, Scott, I really enjoyed our conversation here today. Thanks so much for joining me. Look forward to future conversations and best of luck. Congrats on all you've built so far.
Thanks so much, Jared. The pleasure was all mine.